Are you okay?
I'm okay.
I get them to cry.
You know I can't get out of my head.
I know. Listen.
It just doesn't.
She represented courage, progress, and affirmation. Yet, beneath the relentless spotlight, a profound and painful reality unfolded. What becomes of a child who transforms into a cultural movement before having the quiet chance to simply become a person? This is the complex account of what the world witnessed and the deeper truths it overlooked. The story of America's youngest transition began like countless other childhood narratives, with a child articulating an unmistakable truth. Born in South Florida in 2000, Jazz was assigned Malete birth. But by the tender age of 2, she began asserting her identity. "I'm not a boy," she insisted. "I'm a girl, like that's all I consider myself as." Initially, her parents, Greg and Jeanette, hoped it was a passing phase, but the conviction only intensified. Facing Jazz's inconsolable tears over male clothing and pronouns, her parents made a monumental, unprecedented decision to affirm their child's stated identity. By the age of 5, her social transition was complete. She lived fully as Jazz, a girl with long hair and preferred clothing. However, this was never destined to remain a private family choice. It was soon to become a global phenomenon. In 2007, Jazz appeared on ABC's 20 Over 20 with Barbara Walters, instantly becoming one of the world's most visible transgender individuals. The segment was truly groundbreaking. A stunned and divided nation watched as a careful 6-year-old explained her identity with remarkable clarity. Some praised the Jennings family for their compassion and open-mindedness. Others quickly accused them of rushing their child into a permanent label too soon. That single television appearance transformed Jazz's bright eyes into a cultural firestorm. She was no longer just a child. She became a lightning rod in a rapidly escalating global debate on gender, childhood, and medicine. Behind the televised narrative, something far more complicated was brewing. Jazz's story wasn't merely about personal authenticity. It was about control, public narrative, and the immense weight of representation. Jazz's mother, Jazz Jennings, emerged as a powerful central figure. She was intensely protective, profoundly involved, and fiercely determined to forge a public path, not just for Jazz, but for all trans children. Jeanette became the de facto spokesperson for trans youth parenting, managing interviews, arranging major appearances, and later overseeing the TLC reality series I Am Jazz, which chronicled her daughter's adolescence. The pressing question was this pure support or careful orchestration? From that pivotal moment onward, Jazz's private life became indistinguishable from a media machine. Reality TV cameras followed her everywhere, to school, to the therapist's office, to doctor's appointments, and even into her moments of personal reflection. She published a children's book, embarked on speaking tours, and was celebrated as a role model to thousands. Yet, signs of tension and emotional strain were quietly visible beneath the surface, growing heavier year after year. Jazz wasn't just living her truth. She was performing it on cue for millions. As Jazz neared puberty, her family made another bold and highly controversial decision. At age 11, under medical supervision, Jazz started taking puberty blockers. These pharmaceuticals are designed to suppress the natural onset of puberty, thereby preventing the development of male secondary sex characteristics like a deeper voice, facial hair, and genital growth. Her family and physicians framed it as a medical necessity, a way to avoid the trauma of a physical development that conflicted with her core identity. To many in the activist and medical communities, this represented a progressive, affirming stride. But others raised fundamental questions that resonate even louder today. Was Jazz truly old enough to consent to such an irreversible choice? Could a child fully grasp the long-term ramifications of halting a natural developmental process? The blockers were later followed by cross-sex hormones, specifically estrogen, to feminize her body. By age 14, her voice remained unchanged, her frame slight, and her overall physical development resembled that of a cisgender girl. On the outside, she projected a feeling of confidence and contentment, but internally, deep-seated doubts began to surface. Privately, Jazz started recording raw, unedited video journals. In one particularly unsettling moment later aired on I Am Jazz, she confessed, "I feel like I'm living a lie. I don't feel like me." This admission was a major alarm bell for many. For years, Jazz had been presented as the perfect trans youth success story. Healthy, happy, and thriving. Now she was sitting alone, visibly confused and intensely questioning herself. The growing sense of unease transcended mere emotion. It became existential. Psychologists have long debated the impact of blocking puberty, not just physically, but on identity formation, emotional regulation, and cognitive growth. By bypassing this natural process, had Jazz been deprived of something intangible and vital? Critics theorized that by freezing Jazz's development, the adults in her life had simultaneously frozen her capacity to question or change her mind. She had never experienced what it felt like to explore her identity privately, to mature naturally alongside her peers. Every single step of her self-discovery had been publicly documented, curated, and applauded. As puberty blockers became a political lightning rod, Jazz's experience was solidified as a cultural case study. To proponents, her life validated early medical intervention. To opponents, it stood as a sober, painful, cautionary tale. And for Jazz herself, the profound burden of expectation of always being the right kind of trans person, always advocating, always smiling, was slowly, painfully becoming unbearable. Her tearful diary entries were not simply pleas for help. They were stark public warning signs. This was not liberation. It was a life increasingly disconnected from the self. By the time Jazz Jennings turned 17, her journey had been extensively hailed as a gold standard case study in early gender transition, lauded in academic forums, medical seminars, and advocacy circles. Yet, beneath the stream of accolades, a complicated and unanticipated medical reality was taking shape. In 2018, Jazz underwent gender confirmation surgery, a procedure intended to construct a neovagina. It was broadly celebrated as a crucial milestone, not only for her personal journey, but for the entire transgender youth movement. She was one of the youngest individuals in the U.S. to receive this irreversible operation. However, the tone of celebration quickly dissipated. On I Am Jazz, her doctor spoke with surprising candor. Because Jazz had been on puberty blockers from such a young age, she had not developed sufficient penile tissue needed to construct the vaginal canal, an anatomical consequence directly linked to the medical path her transition had followed. Surgeons were forced to improvise using skin grafts from her stomach to compensate for the lack of material. It was a risky, delicate endeavor. Complications arose within days. Jazz developed intense pain, profound inflammation, and significant healing issues. Far from being a one-time event, the initial surgery marked the beginning of a grueling medical saga. She required multiple follow-up surgeries to address structural infections and persistent problems. Each new procedure compounded the massive physical and emotional toll. "I've had a lot of surgeries," Jazz stated in a later interview. "And I've had a lot of complications," which had served to inspire school guidelines, medical policies, and TED Talks, now revealed troubling, undeniable cracks beneath its polished surface. Could a child at 5 or even 11 genuinely grasp the lifelong medical and psychological consequences of a transition that permanently altered the mind and body? This uncomfortable line of questioning became utterly impossible to ignore, especially after a provocative 2023 article in Spiked Online titled "The Tragedy of Jazz Jennings." The piece was unsparing in its critique. It accused the adults in Jazz's life, the medical professionals, her parents, and the media figures of outsourcing her genuine well-being to an all-consuming social cause. It argued that Jazz had been forced to become a symbol first and a person second, trapped inside a well-meaning but relentlessly affirming narrative that permitted no room for ambiguity, hesitation, or private exploration. Critics asked whether Jazz had been effectively robbed of natural psychological development, the intimacy of her own evolving emotions, and perhaps most tragically, the right to simply say, "I'm not sure." On her reality show, she articulated unsettling truths, often overshadowed by cheerful soundtracks or upbeat editing. In one particularly jarring scene, Jazz confessed, "I don't experience sexual attraction to anyone. I don't know if ever will." Her expression was blank, her voice monotone. In that single moment, the confident image of a thriving young woman was replaced by a portrait of a confused, possibly traumatized adolescent, deeply uncertain about her body, her desires, and her entire romantic future. The media had meticulously documented her transition step by step. Yet few had ever publicly dared to ask the fundamental question at each juncture. Why? Why was surgery scheduled before adulthood? Why were hormone blockers introduced so early? Why did no one on record question the profound psychological trade-offs? These are not attacks on the validity of trans identity itself. They are powerful critiques of a medical, social, and cultural system that arguably treated Jazz more as an ideological prototype than as a living, breathing, evolving child. As more complex and sometimes regrettable outcomes surfaced from other early transitioners, Jazz's story began to appear not only unique, but terrifyingly emblematic. The affirming narrative, it seemed, had made no room for pain, no room for growing pains, no room for saying, wait. And that critical omission may have ultimately cost Jazz her profound peace of mind. At the zenith of her public career, Jazz Jennings transcended her name. She became a banner of hope. A radiant, articulate teen who wrote best-selling books, starred in her own reality show, and spoke at major universities. She weighs in essence everything trans advocacy groups could desire. Sweet, intelligent, media-trained, and non-threatening, the perfect mascot for progress. But the pedestal is never a safe place for a child to stand. By her early 20s, that meticulously cultivated image began its undeniable unraveling. Slowly, then all at once, Jazz was no longer the unshakable symbol of trans success. She was openly grappling with self-doubt, depression, binge eating, and post-surgical trauma. As she struggled, so too did the movement that had so heavily relied on her story. Activists faced a serious dilemma. How to properly frame Jazz's visible unraveling in a world that thrives on simple, clean narratives. Some advocates chose to double down. They insisted that Jazz's undeniable pain was not a failure of gender transition, but an inevitable consequence of a world still steeped in transphobia. Her difficulties, they argued, only underscored the desperate need for more resources, more support, and greater visibility. Jazz, they maintained, was a pioneer wounded not by her path, but by the relentless cruelty of society. Others took a quieter, more subtle route. Some LGBTQ organizations, which had once eagerly featured Jazz's story in school curricula and brochures, began to quietly distance themselves. She no longer fit the tidy archetype of happy trans teen becomes happy trans adult. Her profound isolation, her tears, her weight gain. These were all inconvenient truths in a culture still aggressively fighting to prove that transition invariably leads to wholeness. And through all this, the political arena watched, poised to strike. Conservative commentators seized upon Jazz's visible pain to argue ferociously against gender-affirming care for minors. Clips from I Am Jazz were deliberately recirculated out of context. Headlines screamed, "Look what they did to her." To them, Jazz was no longer a symbol of hope, but a tragic sign of gross overreach. She became a passive, wounded prop in the relentless culture war debates. Her own voice muted as both sides shouted over her image. Jazz herself grew increasingly weary. In private moments, she expressed utter exhaustion, not just from her personal struggles, but from the immense burden of being a political symbol at all. "I just want to be me," she once softly lamented. Not someone people debate about. But after nearly 2 decades in the spotlight, Jazz's identity was no longer truly hers alone. It now belonged to state houses, classrooms, internet forums, and media panels. She had been assigned a devastating new kind of gender representative, a role no child should ever be forced to shoulder. And now, having endured the procedures, the trauma, the applause, and the intense backlash, the haunting question remains, who is Jazz Jennings when the final cameras finally turn off? For years, the Jennings family was presented to the public as a perfect united front, staunch, loving allies navigating a hostile world for the sake of their transgender daughter. Their home appeared to be a space of perfect affirmation. Press interviews, TV production meetings, and medical planning. To the outside world, they were the very model of progressive parenting and unconditional love. But the emotional cracks were always present. They simply were not broadcast in the highlight reels. Jeanette Jennings, Jazz's mother, was consistently the family's loudest